Good afternoon, everyone. This is a set of people who have come together today to not just explore what it is to experience grief, but also to stake claim in some ways to say, yes, I'm going through grief. I would not want to hide it. I would like to share it. And if it is within my means and capability, I'd like to see how I could also enable my fellow human beings to come together in this journey. Dear friends, HopeWorks Foundation and Skills Cafe, the two organizations that have come together to bring you this, are humbled more than anything else. Because we just thought about it saying there is so much grief. What is it that we could do in order to bring people together to speak about it, to experience it, and to be able to find, in some ways forward with it. And we have with us the panelists who we very carefully chosen and put together. It's my honor and privilege to welcome Bhavna Issar, the founder and CEO of social venture Caregiver Saathi, which supports family caregivers as companions for their well-being across a variety of psychosocial needs through coaching, counseling, support groups, and training. And Bhavna is many personas rolled into one, and her story has been featured in Rashmi Bansal's book, Touch the Sky, the stories of women across India who are changing their destiny. And one of the things I relate so much to Bhavna is, of course, our common love for silver jewelry, but an uncommon interest that she has is that she's a motorcyclist and believes motorcycling has helped her push the boundaries of the body and mind. Bhavna, welcome. And I know that you will add dimensions to this conversation like only you can. Next, we have Dr. Prathima, Professor of Psychiatry and Head of the Department at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS, Bangalore, with over 3 decades of experience involved in helping people with addiction treatment, research on outcome, comorbidities, and in involving national treatment guidelines and international training. She's a pioneer, and her work is in human rights of the mentally ill. Her other interests, history of psychiatry, digital training, training of young mental health professionals. Welcome, Dr. Prathima. The third person we have as part of the roundtable is Sailaja Manacha. I call her Sai, and I think it's easier for me to address her as Sai. Sai, of course, has been working for a very, very long time, and her exclusive focus is really women and leadership, both within the corporate space and outside of this. And she, of course, runs one of the probably the most important program, which is 100% online with reference to women's leadership courses, combining psychology with cutting edge leadership and management learning. She's, of course, a best selling author. Her book, Step Up, published in 2019, was #1 on Amazon. And she works with a whole host of clients, including Siemens, Cerner Healthcare, Huawei, Infi, and of course, Adobe, amongst others. I love her singing, by the way, which is something that I discovered only very recently. And then we have the moderator for today's conversation, Rika Roy, a journalist, a broadcaster, a podcaster, 21 years of experience in telling stories, and 16 years of those at NDTV. Sports, of course, remains her primary beat, which makes her tell life-changing stories of men and women. She loves sports because she believes it's completely empowering. In the COVID times, of course, she's producing stories of people and adding context to content. There's a very specific reason why Rika is here. Many of us may wonder, a sports journalist in a grief roundtable, where's the connection? Believe me, you, my friends, I think what we are going through right now really sans boundaries. This grief, this journey, all of us are undertaking is really without those boundaries. Second, Rika herself has worked in the space for so long, and she shared with me that in the next Olympics, in fact, they have a very, very large conversation, content, information about mental health Now, we could wonder, what has Olympics got to do with mental health? I think it's so similar to life, right? In the journey of life, some success, some failure, some fights, and some victories, and obviously some are not. And who else can explore this whole idea better than Rika herself? So, welcome, Rika, and thank you for accepting to come here. The last person I invite today really is somebody I have been tremendously inspired by. Supriya, I'm not going to speak too much about you. I know the amazing person you are, how your story, when I heard it the first time, made me realize that it's not important to move on, but it's possible to move forward. And with that introduction, I welcome all of you to this session, and I request Supriya to take it over from here to share your story from grief to growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacinta, and thank you everyone who's here and who's taken the time to hear my story today. We're living in this time of great grief. It's, and I hope if I'm able to shine a little bit of light, a little bit of hope for people who are here today, that would be my honor. So the story I'm about to tell you today started over 20 years ago when I met this boy in college. We became the best of friends and we started dating. It was a very ordinary relationship, really, not much of a fairy tale romance about it. And we dithered around for 10 years before we finally got married. And yes, it took us that long to realize that there was nobody else and we were meant to, be together. So we were happy, we were settled, we were finally getting on with life and trying to start a family. Um, and we had our first IVF treatment in 2015. We were super excited for the baby, and like all naive IVF couples, we thought the first time, we try IVF, we're going to have a baby. But unfortunately, before the pregnancy results even came, Gaurav was called away for work. He went very reluctantly, and he never came back. They called me that night, and they said he was in an accident 8 hours away from Bangalore. So I drove in the middle of the night to get there, and I was praying all the way. But I didn't know that my prayers never even stood a chance. And they didn't even have to tell me that when I arrived on spot, because I knew that he was gone. Um, I didn't get to say goodbye either. So here I was, 33 years old, a widow, possibly pregnant, and my whole world was, just crashing and burning, and nothing was making sense. Um, and for almost a year after that, I was frozen. I used to be a very organized person. I knew things. I was very ambitious. I went out there and I did things. And then this whole year, I don't even recall how most of it went, right? I just found myself unable to do even simple things. Like I would put my keys somewhere and I would just forget the next moment where they were, right? And I just remember writing, crying, and going through IVF treatments because I decided to continue the treatments and have our baby in any case. And I went through counseling as well. And my counselor told me that why I was not able to function was because my mind was unable to comprehend the suddenness of the loss. When people are sick, when people are old, you sort of make peace with the fact that they might not be there anymore. But when you lose somebody, accidentally, when you lose them suddenly, then it takes you that much longer to figure out how to come to terms with it, right? And I had nightmares for the longest time. I would dream about him dying in multiple ways because apparently that was my subconscious, trying to overcome the shock of the loss. At least that's what my counselor told me. And in this process, people did support me a lot, right? They tried to help, they tried to be there for me, but I think, they didn't know what to say to someone who was grieving, right? Because we don't normalize grief, right? It's not okay to cry, and we get very uncomfortable, with grief. So instead of understanding what I was going through, people were telling me things like, this too shall pass. and time will heal all wounds, or it's time to move on. And I hated it. It pissed me off because how do you move on? Like, I spent 15 years with this person. How do you just move on, right? And it felt crass and it felt insensitive, and they had just no idea what I was going through, and I felt they were rushing me and not giving me enough time to deal with it, right? And this was when I was not dependent on anybody. I was financially secure. I was living my own life, and still I shudder to think what happens to people who do depend on other folks, right? And it was the worst time of my life. And if someone had told me ever before that I could cry as much as I did that time, I would not have believed them. But I cried for years. I cry now too, because grief stays with you, right? It never really goes away. But what I've learned in these past 6 years is to move forward with it. It's always going to be a part of my life, but I've also realized that even though he's gone, I have to continue living on. And I think having a goal helped, because I was focused on trying to have a baby, right? I had lost Gaurav, but I could still have our baby. So I focused all my energies on that, right? I spent 3 years going through IVF treatments to have our kid. And he was born 3 years exactly on the day that his father passed away, right? That was my little miracle. But more than being born, what Adi did was he gave me a purpose and he gave me an anchor. So, and I think that distracted me a lot from why me, what happened to me, and my life is not worth living anymore, to yes, I need to go ahead and do this and have this baby, right? And slowly, our life came together. We are now back on our feet. I run a small business today. I'm a writer, I'm a book coach. And when I look back to these 6 years, I feel that, this loss has just made me stronger, and it's made me more focused on what is important in life, right? You will never find me again ditching people for a meeting or for work, right? I know what is important in my life now, right? So I wouldn't say that I've conquered grief, but I've made peace with it. And if you've lost someone you love, I would urge you to remember that it's okay to grieve for them. It's okay to fall apart, because you will put yourself together again. It might take time, but you will. And I read something very nice yesterday, and it was a quote that said that some of the most beautiful people in the world are those who have experienced loss, right? Because they have this capacity to love more. They have more gratitude. They have more empathy. So give yourself time, give yourself some space, give yourself some love. And I am sure you will also find your path to growth. So take care and thank you.
It is such a remarkable story of yours, Supriya, and truly a story that we can tell when we talk about grief to growth. And one part of your story that you perhaps didn't say, and I have to tell our audience today, is the child that you finally have was through a surrogate mother, because after years of treatment, of infertility, and the grief that you were in, you could not conceive. And you, a brave woman, stood out there, showed your grit, showed your courage, showed your determination to have Aditya, your little baby, today. And there you are. And one of the quotes that you said today, and that really, really stand out for me, is that you never move on. And that is so correct, that you never move on, but you gather yourself to move forward. I am just so grateful to have met you on this platform, and may the force be with you. With that, I'll open up the round table and I'll go over to Dr. Murthy, to tell us a little more about the signs of grief. Where, when, how do grief start from? And how do we, as intelligent individuals, start recognizing what is grief?
Thanks, Rika. And Supriya, thank you for your story. I'm sure it's difficult each time you have to tell it. There are different emotions associated with it. And you said about moving forward. And I mean, there's another way of looking at it, which is the art of holding on and letting go. I mean, I think that's something that kind of stays with you possibly forever.
Rika, you said, you mentioned intelligent people and dealing with grief. I think grief is something so universal that, it's actually, all of us experience grief in some form or the other. And I think very often we talk about grief in the context of death and separation. But I think for many others, grief can take many other forms depending upon, various contexts. But the responses to it, which is the sense of loss, is possibly something universal. The way you react to it obviously is different, and I think that's something that was mentioned at the beginning. When there is a sense of anticipation and preparedness, even then I don't think the grief is any less for a lot of people, because it also depends on the kind of relationship you have, with that object that you've lost. So I think immaterial of a whole lot of other things, grief is intensely personal when it happens in the context of this kind of unexpectedness. And now, of course, in the introductory remarks, Jacinta mentioned about, when we were talking, she mentioned about, when you have multiple losses, unexpected losses, no time to say goodbye, no time to prepare for anything, then obviously the turmoil is so much more, because there's a sense of confusion. And I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, no one ever told me that grief also felt so much like fear. And I possibly, that's one of the best ways of explaining that, your heart races, you're left confused, you can't think, you're having anxiety, palpitations, you're feeling that, there's nothing left around you, you're feeling completely isolated and in a shadow. So I think these, and as Supriya said, grief is an extremely normal thing. Feeling shocked, feeling angry, feeling bewildered, feeling lost, feeling desperate, feeling that there is no, all the doors are shut. These are some of the common responses. Sometimes people may also feel extremely cheerful, extremely helpless and hopeless. And of course, when grief gets extreme, they may have thoughts that they don't want to continue. One of the other things that happens in the context, like presently, is also a lot of guilt in as part of grief, because you might not have been with a family member, not been able to say goodbye, not participated in the rituals. And that's a very, very lonely feeling to be. So I think the entire spectrum of anxiety, thoughts being affected, feeling low, not being able to sleep, of course, not having an appetite. I think it's an entire spectrum. Supriya mentioned having recurrent dreams of the person who passed away and anxiety around that. I think these are the multiple manifestations of grief.
Dr. Murthy, let me ask you another question. You mentioned that grief is intensely personal. Can it be impersonal as well? The reason I'm asking you is because New York Times lately, used a word called languishing. Is languishing in these days, can that also be form of grief?
Yeah, so I was going to tell you that. The one, of course, is when I intensely suffer a loss. But then for a lot of people, it is also, especially in times of COVID, for example, it's also some kind of a collective. Watching close ones suffer, watching close ones lost, there's a sense almost like like it's happening to yourself. So I remember when I was working in the UK, there was this middle-aged lady who was a very sensitive individual, and every time there was any disturbing news on the television or disturbing news of people around her, she would be also very, very affected. So I think there is also a concept of vicarious grieving, where you do feel for other people, and that can also produce intense grief in terms of what's happening around you.
Right, when you see a lot of known people, a lot of young people you relate to, them leaving you, perhaps that's not a very personal affair, but at the same time, colleagues going, teachers going, friends going, that could also lead to grief. And because it's sudden, perhaps it takes time, that much time to process as well. Again, Bhavna, let me ask you, when it comes to family, children, how does one really then deal with situations like this? situations of grief?
I think Dr. Murthy beautifully described that the overwhelming sense around grief is not just a separation with a person or a relationship, but it is the sense of loss. And I think, all age groups, irrespective, experience a sense of loss from events and even the reality of death. I think the young don't have a vocabulary. And increasingly, we also find that adults also don't have the language to be able to express the emotion and the turmoil and the challenge that one is going through. I think if I look at my own experience, I was fairly young when I lost my dad. And although in my 20s, I think my response to grief was that of numbness. So in addition to all the things that Dr. Murthy outlined, I think there is also sometimes a desire to cope with grief with a certain quality of numbness because I do not want the pain to touch me so that I can go about doing what I have to do. I had a sense of responsibility towards my family. And for me, it was very important that I kind of kept our family together. Sometimes in a conventional home, when it comes to children, we often find that you will find this is commonly said, children are very resilient and very adaptable. I think that is such an unfair thing to younger people. Very often you will find that in a home that is grieving, you will also say stuff like, go to a child, and I heard it a lot, which is, you have to be strong for your either younger sibling or another parent.
Mother, yeah.
For the mother, etc., right?
Let me ask you, do you think that is inappropriate?
I strongly believe that's inappropriate.
Yes.
And I don't know what Dr. Murthy would have to say, but at least from my point of view, I feel that it put an inordinate amount of pressure and a false sense of responsibility on me to not be able to express the loss. I think I took as many as 14 years to get in touch with the fact that I was a young girl who had lost her father and who needed to grieve that loss. So sometimes by having these labels and by having a view that some grief is bigger than the other, that children are more resilient, that it is okay for an older person to go versus a younger is a bigger tragedy, etc. I think I'm not sure whether that's the right approach. I don't think one sense of loss is comparable to another. And I do think that in these times, a loss of any relationship. So for example, one would say, I lost a young father, so that is tragic. But someone who has lived with their father for a very long time has a very long history of a relationship. That is equally a sense of loss. It is the loss of a relationship of a parent. How is that lesser or whatever, comparable? They are just different. So I think each person's experience of grief is unique because each one of us is different. Our circumstances are different. Our relationships are different. Our responses are different. But while our experience of grief is unique, we can grieve only in solidarity and in social settings. So the grieving process can be done along with another set of people. Mm-hmm. It is incomplete when done alone.
Sailaja, let me come to you. In this time when we are losing so many people around us, there's, I think a huge responsibility on us, the extended circle, to reach out to the families in an appropriate manner. what is that appropriate way of reaching out to people who've lost their loved ones, and be sensitive, not be insensitive, not sound not sound condescending, um, not say anything that seemed inappropriate, like what just Bhavna said, that she was told that she has to take responsibility because her mother's around, and she has to be the responsible child.
Yeah, thanks, Rekha, for that question. I think I was really struck by what Supriya shared, yeah, in connection with this question, Rekha. And she shared how she hated the kind of things that people told her. Yeah, so I really think that most of us don't have the languaging that is sensitive enough. So first and foremost, constantly telling people, I understand. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah, what does I
Yes.
understand, right? Or telling people, this whole we're quite hung up on this be positive stuff, right? Which I think is such crap when it comes to what's going on now. There is no way to be positive. Yeah, I mean, we are in a big breakdown, and there is nothing to be positive about it. So I find that be positive, be strong, move on, and time will heal, as Supriya said. I think these are cliches that are absolutely best avoided in our conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I find in my own experience of grief, both personal grief, where I have lost, and also with clients and in working with people, that a quiet presence is sometimes the most soothing. Yeah, we don't always need words. Yeah, if we sit next to somebody, right, that's good enough. Yeah, sometimes when we didn't have all I mean, right now we are having all these visiting and social distance issues, yeah, which is
Yes.
an
In
additional
these times, what do
burden.
you do? How do you deal with
I
such
find,
things in
I
these times?
find, I find maybe there's just a message that you send somebody. Yeah, you're just checking in. How are you? Yeah, send a voice note if you use WhatsApp or any other form. Yeah, which is just a loving note of I'm thinking about you. I have you in my thoughts. I made something yesterday, and I thought of you because I know you like it. Yeah, this for me is far more powerful than any of the cliches that we may use. I think connecting over the phone, connecting if the person is ready, in a video format, and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be said. You don't have to be saying too much. It's really to just ask, "How are you?" And sometimes even "How are you" is not enough, because it's a pressure for people to answer how, yeah, a response to "How are you," and so sometimes even that is not needed. Yeah, just to say, "I'm thinking of you." you know how's your day been, something as innocuous as that. Yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
kindness and thoughtfulness to show that they are in your mind, I think that is far more powerful than just languaging and mouthing stuff. So yeah.
Dr. Murthy, I would like to get back to you on the subject of positivity that Sai just mentioned. Just saying in these times, try to be positive, try to have a positive outlook. At times, I as an individual feel that there is a lot of toxic positivity. Do you feel that? And how to deal with toxic positivity? Dr. Murthy, the question is for you.
Yeah, let me just answer that slightly differently. I think it's very important, that this messaging perhaps is kind of for a whole spectrum of people, and perhaps I'm just arguing both aspects of it, and that's possibly to do with a proportion of people who might be afraid that that they might get, I think we're talking about in the context of the COVID, right? That they might get sick, etc., etc., and the knowledge that most people have a mild illness and get away with it. I think it's in that limited context that one must understand this. But on the other hand, as all of us have said, there are so many instances of us having either personally encountered loss or people around us, suffering and having to go through various problems. So, and I think at that point in time, it's very difficult to kind of, have only one set of emotions, to the exclusion of others. It's just impossible. There will always be an anxiety about, us and our loved ones falling ill, about them needing hospitalization, about separation, about loss, and so on. So I think actually the most important thing right now is something that Sailaja mentioned, which is compassion and kindness. And I think for whatever it is, not just the grief of loss, but for a whole lot of other difficulties people around us are going through, those ought to be the ways of responding to it.
Bhavna, as workplaces open, of course, we don't know at what point we will see more people getting back to work. There will be a lot of colleagues who will be returning to work, who would have lost their loved ones. What would be an appropriate way of reaching out to them? Not being intrusive, yet being by their side. Bhavna, are you still there?
Rika, I don't see Bhavna here.
Sai, can you take up that question then?
Yes, sure. You're talking of the organizational space, right, Rika?
Yes.
Yeah. So I find that I'm currently working with some organizations, around this piece, because it's just wonderful to see organizations that are so proactive around the whole emotional health space. I find that there are groups that are very valuable, and people who are going through things come to groups, and they are held in a group process for 60 minutes, 90 minutes. And this is very valuable. It's not like they're taught anything. Again, I'm talking about a healing presence, the capacity to be able to share, to talk, to hear each other's stories. And often people leave saying, I'm not alone. And that is very powerful at this time. I also find there are organizations, where, leaders and managers are aware that this is happening. So they have check-ins, with their teams, which are not just about the agenda for what the team has to do, but truly check-ins for people to share how they're doing. People take on in a team, the responsibility of checking in with the person, calling, finding out how they are. I also know organizations who've hired counselors and therapists so that one-to-one work is also possible, especially if people are, people are really not in a good place and they become dysfunctional, right? Then I find there's also a lot of one-on-one work that is happening. But by and large, I'm seeing that, aware and proactive organizations, leaders are taking an important role, right, to reach out and to be present and to provide some kind of holding structure for the individual, so that they can go through whatever they're going through. So, yeah.
Dr. Murthy, Supriya said something that really struck me. She said that, in the space that she was in, crying wasn't normal. In the workspaces that we return, that we go to, can crying be seen as a normal activity, or anyone who cries? For long, we've had this impression, as in people have carried this impression of anyone who cries is weak. But can one be vulnerable in workspaces, and can that vulnerability then not be considered as a weakness of that person?
I think there can be a lot of stigma around, being seen as weak and so on. So there is a huge, and that again poses a huge pressure on that particular individual. And I think that's why it's so important for workplaces to actually be empathetic, to have opportunities where people can express their grief, to actually respond more sympathetically to somebody who's upset, rather than, simply say you control your emotions. And I think that's what it's about. Grieving is about having the freedom to express your emotions. I had a call last week from a 62-year-old lady who, within a span of a month, lost both her son-in-law and her son. And, when we were talking about it, the first thing she said is, I want to grieve. I need a space where I can actually experience this loss, express my feelings about this particular loss. I want that process, and I think that's something that everybody should have the space and the perhaps the environment to actually grieve, the room to actually grieve. And that's something that, in some ways, the kind of social distancing that's happening now is possibly impacting it in two different ways. Here you would have people around you, you would have rituals to do, whatever you might say about that. It would give you those days where you had your mind focused on certain things. Now you're possibly entirely processing it alone, and if you don't have the wherewithal to do it, it can be extremely difficult. So on the one hand, one does need the space to be able to grieve, and on the other, as Shailaja mentioned, you possibly need the support to be able to express it if you need to. And by and large, most of us need some kind of avenue to express our grief.
Sai, one of the things that always intrigues me is that women, I think, are more accepting to the idea of reaching out to girlfriends or maybe managers. But men, even if they are grieving, they do not often admit to the fact that they're grieving. How to deal with that?
Um, of course, we know that much of this has to do with our socialization, right? In terms of
Social conditioning, yes.
And how girls and boys are socialized in the world, and so there is a bigger permission to access the emotional side of us and to show it and to go through it. I find that with men who do not express it, I find it's very useful for people to anyway do other kinds of kind things with them. Yeah, processing grief is not about saying, okay, let's talk about the loss or whatever's happening.
Right.
Tell me about your feelings. Yeah, that's a very conventional way of understanding and processing grief. But even if we can provide a kind presence, thoughtful company, just time doing things that the person does in everyday life, doing things that the person may enjoy, yeah, even allowing their energy to to flow in whatever way it comes, even that is a good way for people who are stuck or are conditioned to not express. So I find that people still reaching out, still making themselves kindly available, thoughtful kindness, presence, and just time with them is, I think, very, very valuable. I certainly think what is not appropriate is saying, how are you feeling? It's okay to feel, and these kind of things, which is just so jarring. And I don't think men or anything like that.
Bhavna, would you like to add to that? I see you're back.
Yes, sorry about that.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I've had a couple of experiences, and I was laughing before we started this session when Jacinta said we've put together a panel of women. And I was laughing to her saying, I think I'm quite a masculine woman. What I really mean by extending the idea what Sai spoke about of, men and a masculine orientation to what's okay and what's not okay. And I think for me, it's very hard to access my feelings, although that's my profession, even so. And there are a couple of friends that I have supported during their grieving process, and typical men who may have lost a parent at an appropriate time, which is, it's okay to have an older person go and, whatever else. I love what Sai said about providing silent presence. There are many ways of providing that. Sometimes we feel that we don't have access to that support that we can offer, but there are many ways of offering it. With these two friends, what I used to do, and this is pre-pandemic, I used to just send them a message every morning. Hi, I'm thinking of you. For many days, they didn't reply, and it was okay. And I didn't expect a response. Sometimes I would say, here's what's going on with me. And it was not important whether they replied to it or they didn't. but I wanted them to know that they were in my thoughts and that I was walking the path with them, and that I wanted them to know that I was with them. That's the best that I can do. I don't think I know what they are going through. I don't think I can offer anybody any advice, but I can just simply hold that person's hand, however virtually. Um, and there are many ways to express that. Today, I find that with so many pieces of news that one gets, I was rueing to my husband that, should something happen, I don't like the many WhatsApp messages that get expressed. They feel hollow. They don't feel enough. They don't feel right. But that's because all of us are somewhere feeling hollow. So I think if we can acknowledge what we are feeling more than ask what the other might be feeling or want to help the other, we might actually be reaching out and creating a space for connection better.
Bhavna, you said a very interesting thing, holding the hand virtually. Is that making the COVID challenges, making grieving, reaching out to people in times of need when they really, really need you difficult? Is that making grieving difficult?
Yeah, it does. I think one of my most poignant moments in my life was when one of my mentors, I was having a very difficult moment. And I remember this very fondly, that he just held the phone and was quiet. We were quiet together for 20 minutes. And I was rushed. And I said, I can put the phone down and you may have other things to do. And he said, no, let's just be on the phone. We were both quiet. And I was, of course, in a pool of tears, which I didn't want him to know. But I think sharing silence, like Sai referred to, and it is possible to do it on the phone. It is possible to be mindful of your voice. It is possible to choose words appropriately. And it is possible to offer solidarity, even with the limitations that we have right now. We just have to find our own way. There isn't a prescription. And I very often remember, what will work for me will not necessarily work for you.
Yes, there isn't a template really.
Yes. So I remember my grandmother very fondly. She lived through the partition time, and she would say that whether or not you can join someone in their celebrations, you should always join someone during their times of difficulty and grief. And she would say, it's okay if you don't know what to say, but you can still just be there, and just be there with your presence, whatever your presence is, in solidarity, awkwardness, difficulty, whatever it is. And I think I remember her words very, very mindfully these days.
Dr. Murthy, I have to ask you this question about not just people returning to work, but about the families they have at home. They have elderly parents, and some of whose friends have also passed due to COVID. And it's not just about the mental health of us, our generation, but the older generation that people like us have to then tackle, understand, and and then help them as well. How does one address parents in these times, really, who are elderly, who may have gone through their own set of grief? They're also going through as much, maybe more than what we are going through by seeing contemporaries pass in this time.
I'm actually possibly a generation which has to deal both with the parents as well as with young, with adolescent or young adults. So I mean, it's quite a strain, because normally we've always looked up to our elderly to be the sources of support for us. And at this particular time, I mean, I think at least many of them are pretty much handicapped because they are kind of used to having, lots of people around them, talking in person, sharing experiences. So for at least for those of them who are digitally connected, who can talk on the phone or have a WhatsApp call, I find the need to actually connect is very, very, very much there. So I think actually providing opportunities to do that is also very important. And sometimes one of the things I feel is that, one needs to take the responsibility over for them. Earlier one used to rely on their experience and their ability to console you. And now I think that we do, at least I perceive a role reversal there, that we need to do that. But once you empower them and once you make them feel more secure, because there are lots of other fears as well. Anyway, I don't think they express it because they don't want to be seen as, burdening their children. They're worried about their health. And as you said, they're reading about laws, they're coming to know about laws of people they've kind of known for ages, and they haven't been able to see them during the lockdown. They've not been able to connect. So I think that disconnect is very, very troublesome for older people. And therefore, I think, the one way of reaching out is really to be able to support them in the ways possible, because they are still traditional in the way they want to grieve and so on. So helping them at least to connect up with others, to kind of, chat with their buddies, if you will, that's possibly one of the ways to help them.
Sai, how important is it in an organizational space to deal with things like family issues that are happening within the family? Because when an individual comes to a workspace, it's not just his or her energy; it's a collective energy that person brings in. So, in these challenging and complex times, how important is it to be able to, for the organizations to be able to support that person and the energies that they bring along? Sai, can you hear me? Are you there?
Just unmute, I think.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just this morning I did a session with an organization whose topic was, what more can we be in our families? Yeah, so there are organizations that are very much thinking that the family is also their business. And I think it should be their business, because the employee is certainly yours and you care about that employee. So we've heard of this whole idea of bringing our whole self to work. Yeah, now we don't go anywhere to work, right? We come to our desk and we look at our boxes like this on screens, and that's work. So I do think that when an employee is not in a good place, is not in a place where they feel settled, balanced, where they can bring, their full involvement into work, then I think it is the organization's business to attend to it. So I think in whatever way possible, allowing employees to talk about their stresses, whether it is, children who are on vacation, smaller kids who need support, whether it's, inability to work at certain hours, whether it's people being able to tell their managers, tell HR that I need a break. Yeah, it's just too much for me. Yeah, or for people to be able to juggle schedules because their working spouse has a different priority and they need to be available for family. It could be elder care or children. I think organizations that create the space, Rika, for people to come up and say, this is what's going on for me, this is what I need, can I have some allowance, right, in this area? I think the more organizations create space for this kind of expression, where it is safe for people to be able to say this, I think they would be in a far better place in terms of taking care of these issues. So I do think the family issues and everything that comes with it is doubly significant at this time, because there are huge amount of stressors, for every employee, simply because of the kind of the number of balls that are in the air and the juggling that is going on. So yeah.
Since we are talking about grief to growth here, and all of you are here with me, let me start by asking Dr. Murthy, if we are to travel from grief to growth, what are those tools? Maybe you can tell me top 3 things, top 5 things that one really then needs to keep in mind, keep practicing, exploring, connecting. I don't know in what way you're going to give me the solutions, but yes, some solutions from you, Dr. Murthy.
It sounds cliched to give a list of solutions, but
a toolkit. Well, that's the word. Doing it wrong.
So I think just as we recognize grief as a process, recovery has to be a process. And I think one of the most important thing is when we talked of compassion, I think we have to be kind to ourselves first. And I think we ought to, not be pressured by the expectations of others, and give ourselves time. And so some degree of self-care, having a routine, having and being connected. I think these are very, very important issues. I would think that those are very critical to helping oneself and moving on. And I think when you move on, the memory of the grief or the person you've lost never ever goes away. But actually being able to convert the loss into a sustaining memory, which stays with you forever, I think is another very important thing that you need to learn.
Is that what you call catharsis?
I think that's the word for that would be more possibly an actualization rather than a catharsis. That you go on.
Rika, if I may build on.
Yes, I was coming to you. Please go ahead.
It's a matter so close to my heart. I just had to jump into it.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so the way that I see it is that our overall well-being has many aspects to it. And one of the things that we work with is this, that, you can look at it in many frames. One is, if you look at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's format, so she talks about various stages, and obviously they're not just stages. It is a unique experience, and you can categorize different phases and back and forth and everything else. Kistler has come up with the next phase of understanding grief. I am going to take inspiration from that. I think recognizing what Supriya also mentioned is having a goal for yourself, having a purpose of life, and alignment of what you do in your life with your purpose can be a very powerful, positive spin on your well-being, which can propel you to growth. If you look at it from the Indic wisdom point of view, they say that living a dharmic life is about being able to take your personal suffering beyond yourself. So if you can take your personal suffering after you have done your grieving, etc., if you can take your personal suffering beyond yourself and make it your purpose or your contribution to society, to say that this is something that I will offer to the world, then it gives me a sense of purpose. It gives me an opportunity to lead a dharmic life. And I think that's a positive propellant, if there may be one. And the second, I think that can be very powerful, is your creative expression. Each one of us has a unique existence. We all have our unique expression of not just who we are, but how we participate, how we engage. My creative expression is not just how I dress up, my hobbies, how I participate, and so on. And my creative expression of engaging with the world and my identity can be the second powerful propellant to take me to growth. Other things remain. And like Supriya said, the quantum of grief doesn't really, it washes over you from time to time. But you learn to move forward with these two.
Sai, one of the outstanding quotes that we keep reading throughout our life is the Mark Twain one. He says, two most important days in our lives are the day we are born and the day we realize our why. Perhaps why means the reason for being. How many people you meet on your journey who know the reason for being? And hence, knowing the reason for being that Bhavna just mentioned, is able to process their grief perhaps knowing that helps one that process the grief, but how many people you meet, they actually know the reason for their being, and thereby, like we know Supriya knew the reason for her being. So perhaps for her, it was 1 degree easy to process the grief.
I think, Rika, reason for being is really a very big question. And for me, it's also a fairly spiritual kind of question. So I think it's a very big question and a complex one. And so I don't think most of us, are in touch with that. But I think if you bring it down to a more, for me, a more worldly conversation, then the language of goals, the language of what is it that I really deeply care about, the language of where do I want to commit my time, energy, the language of purpose. I think all of this is really more worldly for me. I think there are very few of us actually, Rika, who engage with that question. I think a lot of us are have a high propensity for action and to just be, in some sort of action moving somewhere. So I think that this question is something that a lot of people who hit grief or hit any kind of road bump, yeah, it may not be a grief as in grief from death, but any other kind of grief also, I find they often come to this question. Yeah, the poets come to this question often because it is a pain that triggers often this kind of question. So yeah, I think in my work, I don't meet too many people who are already in the know of this. And I think a lot of my work is to support people engaging with this question. Yeah, and asking themselves, what is it that I really, really care about? And where is it that I want to put my time, my energy? I think, yeah, so very few people, Rika.
I might just
Bhavna,
add, Rika,
yeah,
I
yeah,
might
please.
just add that it might even be
Yes.
about developing a purpose, which
Yes.
which you didn't know about
Sure.
earlier.
Sure.
Yes.
Bhavna, one of the things during this period that I have constantly been hearing is, people saying, God bless you, God help you, may the force be with you. Never before, this time, this period, have I heard people, professionals, refer to God so many times in a conversation. Now, my question to you really is, how open are workspaces to accept, people's faith? There are a lot of people who cling on to a certain thing. Can they be open about what they cling on to, their faith, to overcome their fear in workspaces? And what is the role of the workspace to then, create a neutral environment? So someone can be a Hindu, another person can be a Muslim, whatever, different faith, but to openly express their faith, to say, God help you, or Bhagwan bhala kare, ya fir, whatever, Allah aapka raksha kare, whatever. So are the workspaces open to accepting, and what can they do really to have people back and have people's faith accepted as well?
I really wish I have a nice answer for that question, but I'm going to fumble through this. But allow me this. I think it's an exploration worth having. So I think gone are the days of the times when one could demarcate our personal and professional lives. As Sai pointed out, we are in each other's homes as we speak right now. So the boundaries of our personal and professional lives are really blurred. And I think, at least I speak for myself, in those workplaces that I have been my best, have been the ones that have accepted my whole self, or I have been able to bring all parts of myself in a way, in the unique creative expression or the expression that I have of my being. And a big part of my being is my faith, or the lack of it, whatever defines it, or my belief in whichever thing that anchors me. Spiritual well-being is a very big part of our overall well-being. And for us to be in touch with whatever that is, whatever our exploration around it is absolutely essential. Workplaces have often so far kept themselves sanitized of certain aspects of life, religion and politics being two big ones. And I do think that we are lesser off by not bringing in those conversations. We do need to learn to be able to have adequate compassion and dialogue. I think workplaces need to learn how to create those safe spaces that I alluded to, as well as have spaces in which one can bring up differences, but be able to dialogue those differences and be able to say, you know what, in my faith and my approach, it is like this. And in your faith and your approach, what is that? And if there is that space, like Rumi says, you know, that out beyond right and wrong is
Right.
feel. And if that space can be one in which I don't judge you and I don't feel judged, if we can have those spaces for religion and politics, I think we can bring in a lot more compassion, and bringing in compassion is going to be critical for us to be able to go through this very dark period that we are all going through.
Sai, I would like you to add to that.
I think am very aligned with how Bhavna's talked about it. I think anything that allows an anchor, Rika, is important. And I do feel that organizations are opening up. I was just talking to another organization, I think, which is or a group of people in Delhi who are beginning to offer a whole lot of things to organizations. And interestingly, the organization, has asked for what is the list of things that you're going to use. Somebody is using visualization, somebody is using EFT. So I was struck by fantastic, like 15 different people on this WhatsApp group talking about different modalities, including, whatever form of prayer and, so I just thought, great. So there are organizations that, that are actively languaging this, welcoming it, allowing it, creating the space. I think a few, Rika, there can be far more, many more organizations can join that. But I think more than just talking religion or, getting comfort in that language, I really like what Bhavna said, which is allowing whatever anchors people, whatever that is, if it is just working really hard at your work and that anchors you, that's fine, to make that fine, right? And allow that to be fine. So I think so that's what I would say.
Dr. Murthy?
I think if you're rooted in a faith-based system, these things come automatically. But I think in times of uncertainty, you reach out to these things more and more because you don't really have anything else to kind of support you. And that, I think, the allowing that, that flexibility and actually allowing people to reach out to what helps them, I think is very, very important. And at this point in time, even people who are not by nature very spiritually inclined, etc., do find spirituality as a very, very good way to kind of keep themselves calm and rooted or anchored. So I think it's very important to and this is very important. I remember during the first lockdown, the number of classes on the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the things that we did as a family was actually tune in every week and actually listen to it. Everyone got different messages from it, but I think it helped enormously to kind of understand some way of explaining our situations and how to cope with it. So I think it's a very powerful way of dealing with it.
Yes, Bhavna, coming back to you.
Spiritual well-being and faith has the ability for us to not just anchor, like both Dr. Murthy and Sai have spoken about, but I think these times have shrunk our circle of control and our circle of influence. But our circle of concern has only become larger, right? And how do you navigate that unknown? You can navigate that unknown only with some faith. That faith doesn't have to be in religion, but that faith has to be in some kind of some hope. It's only appropriate that this session is being held by Hope Works. So hope is a beautiful thing. It is at the bottom of the Pandora's box, but we all need hope. And faith gives us hope.
I think, Rika, what I also want to add there, Rika, is that in all the conversations that I've been doing with, groups of leaders or just employees, etc., I'm almost always ending with something that is soothing, calming, which you could say is in the realm of the spiritual. Yeah. And I find that um, it is just being taken in beautifully, right? And people are always talking about how this 1 hour has been my space of haven and calm in the whole day. So I do think, knowingly, unknowingly, people are gravitating towards it. And like Bhavna beautifully said, I think it fills us up in ways that we cannot explain, right? And so for some people, these sessions, these conversations, or for Jacinta, like she said, she hadn't heard me sing. And so even those few moments can fill us up. And even that can be the energy that we carry for the rest of the day. So I do think it's very, very valuable what Bhavna said. I think this whole spiritual angle is something increasingly people are turning to, because there is no other way to make sense of the world. Yeah. And it is truly a calming place for people. And even when I do it, I tell people, if you're seeing the light, let it appear in whatever way it fits for you, because it may appear in whatever way in their faith system, right? So I think facilitators, it's important to bring that inclusivity and openness to however way it lands for people. But I think it's a very useful piece to bring in.
Such a delightful conversation. I always keep saying, may the force be with you, to hire from Star Wars. And I am kind of a complete believer in that saying, may the force be with you, may the universe be with all of us at this point, and help. As we nurture ourselves, we nurture the universe and help each other grow. One of the outcomes of COVID, this phase, I thought that we have, a lot of us have turned towards the fact that we not only need to help ourselves grow, but also nurture the universe, nurture the creation around us, which we weren't, paying much attention to. And you will be surprised to know that today the city of Delhi reported the cleanest air. And when I saw that news flash on my, phone screen, I was like, wow, this is what COVID is giving us in return, the cleanest air that I have breathed all my life in Delhi. So perhaps that's nature's lesson to all of us. I would like to open to questions from the audience. If anyone has questions, or I would like to get closing remarks from my panelists. Actually, we can start to wrap. If we have the questions, I will forward the questions to you. Dr. Murthy, you've given us tools to navigate in this pandemic world. But, if there could be one takeaway from the session, one thing that I need to remember, going ahead in my journey to growth, understanding myself, understanding people around me, what would that be?
I think the last discussion was kind of, tells us that all of us want to be in a space where we feel calm and we feel happy and we feel loved. And I think grief kind of hugely displaces this desire. But I think in the process of how we handle grief, how we take care of ourselves, how we convert that into some kind of purpose, we kind of come back to that homeostasis that we desire. So I think finding ways in which we can actually deal with this negative situation and actually possibly grow as individuals. And I think that's where grief can also be an experience where one actually grows and learns how to handle it. So
I think we got a question, how to tackle mental pressure during a tournament. Maybe this is from someone who plays tournaments. So would you like to address that, Dr. Murthy?
Yeah, just before that, I just thought I should also emphasize that there can be times, we've only been talking about, good ways of dealing with grief, but sometimes grief can be overwhelming. And if people are extremely distressed, feeling very negative about themselves, not able to simply manage things, I think reaching out for help is very, very crucial. And I think that's a message that everybody needs to know, that they don't have to do it all themselves. Everybody does not have circles of support. they need to possibly reach out and get help before it kind of converts into something which is, more severely, in depression or, suicidality and so on. I think that's very important for everybody to remember, that there is help out there. Handling mental pressures, I think, the way we handle any kind of situation depends on a whole lot of things. I mean, our own temperaments, our previous experiences. A certain amount of anxiety is very, very important to win a tournament. If you did not have that anxiety, you probably wouldn't get propelled to do things much better than others. But I think recognizing that a certain amount of excitement and adrenaline is good, but when does it become overwhelming? And then how can you calm yourself and kind of be prepared for it? You have to think your way through tournaments. So, that level of anxiety, which allows you to think but not overwhelms you, is something that you need to, which will possibly help you in that situation. Thanks.
Bhavna, closing remarks?
So the one thing that I think we all need to tell ourselves is that I am important, I am significant, I am lovable, and that I deserve compassion, as much as that I have lots of love and compassion to give to someone else. So there are times I forget that. I might be saying that very confidently right now, but there are times I have to remind myself. So I have some people around me who will sometimes shake me up and remind me, and sometimes who will kindly remind me. But I think to just simply remember that however insignificant we are, in the realm of the universe, we are very insignificant, but nonetheless, we are significant. So if we can remember that, and that we are the universe, and we have lots of love to receive and to give, that would be my closing remark.
Okay, there is a question. How can we tackle our employee who's going to die with COVID? He knows and we know. Bhavna? It's like a bouncer in cricket.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is a template for this, and I don't know if I know the right answer for this. But I think what would I do is something I can offer is, I think I would get in touch with my feelings and my sense of loss around it. But I would remember that I can comfort that person to the extent that I can. So I would ask that person, what is it that would comfort you? What is it that ails you? And what is it that pains you? What can I do that can bring you comfort? That can bring you, that can help you with this transition. Sometimes the experience of pain is not just the physical experience of pain. For a large number of us, the experience of pain is unfinished business. The experience of pain is the pain that I leave behind, the people who love me and who care for me. So if I can have an open conversation, however hard that conversation is, then I can comfort that person and tell myself that I did the best in that moment of transition. Again, I will take inspiration from our Indic wisdom. Transition or death is an exchange of prana, and to be present when someone is making that transition is a matter of honor, and it might be valuable to actually engage with that person and be able to offer yourself and say, tell me, it will be difficult. It's not going to be easy. It's one of my biggest regrets in life. My father wanted to have that conversation with me and I couldn't have that conversation. But I think I would have that conversation.
Sai, would you like to take up?
Talking about this question, Rika?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like to?
No, I think I don't think any differently from how Bhavna has answered it. I think being, more than doing something, it's just being there. Someone who's going, I'm guessing they won't even be able to talk too much. Yeah, I was recently with a group, that was full of emotions. And all I did was say, I'm getting my hand here to the screen. Yeah, it's like, imagine your hand could come there too. Yeah, we can do it, Bhavna, put out your hand. Yeah, and that's it. It's really not whether I can touch the hand, Rika. It's really about the fact that my heart wanted to do that for you. That is the comfort. It's not just the fact that we cannot touch each other. So I think someone who's going won't even be able to speak so much. So I cannot even imagine how much of speaking can happen, right? But eye contact can happen. Telling them I'm here can happen. Silence, presence can happen. You know, just telling them that we're here and whatever is needed to be done, we will be there. Because for someone who's going, you can imagine their concerns are around family, around
Right.
the things that they are leaving behind. And so it can be very comforting to know that there are not one, two, but so many people available to take care of what they cannot now care about because they are going. So I think these would be the kind of things that would be practically possible.
Okay, there's another question. Let me read it out to you, Sai. How do we insulate ourselves from the be positive preaching at work and at home? That the circumstances we experience is a mirror of what we carry inside. Our thoughts have manifested our reality. I can't understand how I have created COVID-19 with my thoughts. The first part of it, be positive, we discussed, but if you want to add something to what we've already discussed.
I find that it may seem bizarre what I'm going to say now, that, having a space of hope and abundance, it may seem like a faraway idea, but I don't see it as far away because I think this is an attitude. Abundance, and it's not something that we get in our life, or it's not something that drops into our plate, right? It's really our capacity to have that attitude that there is still life, there is still a way for me to engage. Again, putting to Prathima's idea on goals and purpose. So I do think that we can't shut up people who are talking about the be positive. We can turn away, we can reduce the volume on that for ourselves and not bother with it. We can just continue to be a kind presence. We can turn off the news a little more so that we are not building up a certain anxiety in our system. So I think these are the things really that that we can do, and we can ease into different kinds of self love and caring practices for ourselves so that we can have a space of calm. Because I don't think a full insulation is possible because we're not on the moon. We're living here surrounded by so much despair. So I think to even aspire to that is not possible. It's not realistic. But look for smaller moments of calm. Create those moments for yourself. And as much as possible, turn down the volume, I think, on be positive.
We shall take two last questions. One to Dr. Murthy: how to console old mother? The person who's writing, Sushil Kumar, he's lost his father, and mother and father had an association of 63 years together. Mother keeps on rolling in old memories. Dr. Murthy.
Yeah, I just want to bridge the previous question and the gentleman who, I think the person who asked about, how to talk, to communicate to a person who is terminally ill. I think very often the difficulties, the anxieties that we ourselves have in actually being able to broach, any topic with the person or something. And again, just to respond to Bhavna and her difficulty with her father, I actually have the opposite experience of the conversation that I was luckily able to have with my mother. And I think, my being older, my being in a situation of, older in age, I think helped tremendously to have that conversation. And that can be one of the most beautiful conversations. So I think if we can deal with our anxieties and actually open up and have these conversations, whether it's just sitting in silence, listening, or indeed, asking, what kind of, what can you do? I think it can be one of the most meaningful ways of dealing with grief if you have an opportunity to do it. But for example, we know that most often we don't have that opportunity. And, and that's where, all the problems come from. Now, I mean, what a beautiful relationship that must have been, a 63-year-old relationship. I mean, we can only dream of such relationships. I mean, it's very, very, very rare. So I'm sure that there will be, hundreds of thousands of millions of memories associated with it. And if she could express these memories, and there could be somebody to just,
Beautiful.
non-judgmentally just listen to them. I mean, I think that would be the greatest, relief that she would have, because a lot of the older people, one of the things that they do is relive a lot of their memories, and particularly in grief, reliving memories can be a wonderful way of actually dealing with those memories.
Dr. Murthy, one more question here. Some people transform grief into misplaced anger. How should we respond to such situations and help such individuals?
I think Bhavna was referring to Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And certainly anger is one of these stages. You first deny, the fact that anything has happened, and then you're extremely angry. So the emotion of anger is something that happens in this, in this whole process of grieving, and then you kind of bargain, and then of course you get upset and depressed, and then you accept and you move on. However, you're possibly talking about the behavior of anger. Now, I mean, it's unusual that, that there are two ways it can happen. A person who's not temperamentally prone to such things can suddenly become angry, and that's possibly momentary, that's possibly will gradually reduce. So I think it's important for the significant others to understand this. But there are some people who are prone to being angry at the least kind of thing, and that's an emotion they use a lot. And I think for people like that, it's very important to really understand that anger is something that one can kind of modify and kind of change, so that it actually, you're able to express distress much better and actually get more empathy rather than just lose it.
Ladies, thank you very, very much for those lovely insights. Yes, anyone wants to add?
I was about to.
Yes, Bhavna.
Anger is the guardian of sorrow. And anger is sometimes our expression that we have because we are not able to be sad enough. I am fundamentally an angry person. So a lot of people who might know me will know that I express anger a lot easier. It could be my misplaced grief for all you know. But basically, I think what is hidden behind that is a deep sense of sorrow or sadness. So the way that I look at it is, when someone is angry, or a misplaced anger as it is called, it is just my sadness leaking in various ways. So if we can offer some compassion to that anger, it will find a place to manifest into whatever other form of growth is. Let's be kind to anger.
Bhavna, I have to say that's fantastic degree of self-awareness, what you just said, because we often don't realize that sadness or anger is the guardian of sadness. Ladies, thank you very, very much for joining me on this delightful chat. I have held you back far too long than we promised to get you here. And with that, I would like to hand over to Jacinta for the closing remarks.
Rika, thank you so much. I can only say I'm grateful for this conversation, because one, this week has been particularly difficult for me, because right from Monday, every day of the week, I've lost someone, either at the workplace or at home or in the friend circle. And I haven't had the space. And the reason why I went off video was because I wanted to cry. And I think the space provided me that. And I hope for the hundreds who joined us today, and there were many who were still trying to get in. So the overwhelming response, I think, is a reflection of the times we live in. I think we are all grieving in so many ways. Some of us are able to find the voice and the language for it. Some of us are clearly struggling. And what we want to do at HopeWorks is really try and see during these times, and I know this is going to last for a long time. I wish we could say, no, this is going to be gone. There's going to be, a quick end to this, but I don't think so. And therefore, the need to be an anchor and need an anchor. The space to be a part of a circle and yet be the person who probably creates that circle, I think is on us right now in our homes, in our workplaces, in our friend circle. There are going to be times where we need it as much as we need the air that we breathe. There are going to be times when I think we will find the strength with us to be able to offer it to somebody. But if we can do it with compassion and kindness, like Bhavna, Sai, and Prathima spoke so beautifully. And Rika, you moderated this with so much grace. I can't tell you thank you enough. And Supriya, for always, in all my interactions, making me realize that here's a person who shines a light every time in every interaction, no matter how sad the past has been and how difficult the future may seem. On that note, wishing everyone health, healing, and hope. Signing off for today. Thank you very much.